The ink on the multi-billion-dollar contract was barely dry when Rebecca Matthews walked through her mansion's front door, unaware she had just signed the most lucrative deal in pharmaceutical history. But her husband Daniel was in their bedroom, tangled in silk sheets with his mistress, planning the exact moment he would kick Rebecca and her 2 children out. The December blizzard howled outside their Connecticut estate as Daniel's cruel smile widened, his fingers interlaced with the woman who had poisoned his mind for months, both of them counting down the hours until Rebecca would be standing in the snow with her confused, shivering kids, while he moved his mistress into the master suite. The contract sat in Rebecca's briefcase, a document that would transfer billions into her name within 72 hours. But Daniel had no idea what he was about to destroy, no concept of the empire his wife had built in secret, no understanding that his betrayal would trigger a cascade of consequences so devastating it would leave him completely paralyzed. How could a man be so blind to his wife's transformation from struggling researcher to pharmaceutical titan? What drives a woman to exact revenge so precisely calculated that her betrayer loses everything, his mobility, his wealth, his freedom, his very identity? And what darkness lurks in the heart of someone who kicks children into a snowstorm, unaware that those same children would witness their mother's metamorphosis into something he could never have imagined? Rebecca Matthews pressed her thumb against the biometric scanner, watching the screen flash green as her digital signature sealed the contract that would change everything. But she had no idea that in exactly 47 minutes her husband would shatter her world into pieces so small she'd spend the next 3 months gathering them from the snow. The fluorescent lights in the Manhattan conference room hummed above her as 6 attorneys in charcoal suits nodded their approval, their faces betraying nothing of the seismic shift this document represented for the pharmaceutical industry. "Congratulations, Dr. Matthews," the lead attorney said, sliding the leather portfolio across the mahogany table. "Vitagen Solutions is now yours. The transfer of funds will complete within 72 hours. Rebecca's fingers trembled as she closed the portfolio, but not from excitement, from the bone-deep exhaustion of a woman who had spent 7 years developing a revolutionary gene therapy while raising 2 children and maintaining a marriage that had been dying in slow motion. The contract represented the acquisition of Vitagen Solutions, a biotechnology company she'd built from nothing in a lab no bigger than her kitchen, working through nights when her husband Daniel slept soundly, when her children Lily and Marcus were tucked into their beds, when the world believed she was just another suburban mother with modest ambitions. The numbers swam before her eyes. $4.7 billion in an initial payment, but her mind couldn't fully grasp the magnitude, couldn't reconcile this moment with the woman she'd been 7 years ago, scraping together grant money, mixing compounds in borrowed laboratory space, driven by a singular vision to cure the degenerative disease that had killed her father. She remembered his final months, how the illness had slowly stolen his ability to walk, then to feed himself, then to speak, until all that remained was his eyes, still bright with love but trapped in a body that had become his prison. Rebecca gathered her belongings, her phone buzzing with a text from Daniel. "Working late again? Don't bother coming home for dinner." The message sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the December weather, but she dismissed it as paranoia, the natural anxiety of someone carrying a secret too large to share until everything was finalized. She had planned to tell Daniel tonight, to share this triumph with the man she'd married 12 years ago, the man who had promised to support her dreams even when they seemed impossible. The elevator descended 43 floors as Rebecca rehearsed her revelation, but with each passing floor a sense of dread grew in her stomach, an instinct she couldn't name, whispering that something fundamental had shifted in her absence. She had been in Manhattan for 6 hours, finalizing the deal that would secure her family's future for generations, unaware that her husband had spent those same 6 hours planning her destruction. The drive from Manhattan to their Connecticut estate normally took 90 minutes, but tonight, with the blizzard intensifying, it stretched to nearly 3 hours. Rebecca's Mercedes navigated the increasingly treacherous roads as snow accumulated on the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. She thought about Lily, 9 years old, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn determination, and Marcus, 7, who had inherited Rebecca's analytical mind and his father's athletic grace. Her children had no idea their mother had just become one of the wealthiest women in America. But they also had no idea their father had been conducting an affair for 8 months with Victoria Ashford, a 28-year-old marketing executive who had convinced Daniel that Rebecca's dedication to her research was really neglect, that her late nights in the lab revealed a woman who valued science over family, that he deserved someone who would prioritize his needs above everything else. Rebecca pulled into the circular driveway at 9:47 p.m., noting that every light in the house blazed despite her repeated requests to conserve energy. But she attributed it to Daniel's carelessness, not to the fact that he and Victoria had been celebrating their plan to evict Rebecca, drinking champagne in the bedroom Rebecca had decorated with such care, mocking the woman who had no idea her life was about to implode. The front door was unlocked, but when Rebecca stepped inside calling out for her children, she was met with silence so profound it felt like a physical presence. Her briefcase slipped from her fingers, landing on the marble floor with a crack that echoed through the empty foyer. "Daniel," she called out, her voice bouncing off the vaulted ceilings. "Lily, Marcus." Footsteps descended the grand staircase, but they weren't her husband's familiar stride. Instead, a woman Rebecca had never seen before appeared, wearing nothing but one of Daniel's Oxford shirts, her blonde hair tousled, her smile radiating contempt. "You must be Rebecca," Victoria said, descending the stairs with the confidence of someone who already considered this house her own. "Daniel's been expecting you." Rebecca's world tilted as understanding crashed through her, but before she could speak, Daniel emerged from the master bedroom, fully dressed, his expression cold and distant in a way she'd never witnessed in 12 years of marriage. "Rebecca," he said, his voice flat, emotionless, "we need to talk." "Who is this?" Rebecca demanded, her scientific mind struggling to process the evidence before her. But she already knew, some primal part of her recognizing the predatory way this woman looked at her husband, the possessive way Daniel's hand briefly touched Victoria's lower back as he passed her on the stairs. "This is Victoria," Daniel said, each word precisely enunciated, as if he'd rehearsed this speech. "And she's moving in. Tonight." The words hung in the air like ice crystals, but Rebecca's brain refused to accept their meaning, kept searching for the joke, the misunderstanding, the rational explanation for why her husband was standing in their foyer with another woman wearing his clothes. "I don't understand," Rebecca said, her voice breaking. "Daniel, what are you? Where are the children?" "They're in the guest house with my mother," Daniel replied, his eyes fixed somewhere over Rebecca's shoulder, unable to meet her gaze. "You need to pack your things and leave. Tonight." The temperature in the house suddenly felt arctic, but it was nothing compared to the cold spreading through Rebecca's chest, freezing her lungs, making each breath a conscious effort. "Leave," Rebecca repeated, the word foreign on her tongue. "This is my house, our house. We have children, Daniel. We have a life." "Had a life," Victoria interrupted, her voice honey-sweet but edged with venom. "Past tense. Daniel's been miserable for years, trapped in a marriage with a woman who cares more about her little lab experiments than her own family." Rebecca's hands clenched into fists, but she forced herself to focus on Daniel, to appeal to the man she'd married, the man who had held her hand in the delivery room when Lily was born, who had danced with her at their 10th anniversary party. "Daniel, please," Rebecca said, stepping toward him. "Whatever this is, we can work through it. We have children. We have history. I know I've been distracted with work, but nothing." Daniel cut her off, his voice rising. "I'm done, Rebecca. Done pretending I'm happy. Done living in the shadow of your obsession with dead cells and test tubes. Done explaining to our friends why my wife can't attend social events, because she's too busy playing scientist." Each word was a blade, but Rebecca heard something beneath the anger, something coached and artificial, as if Daniel were reading from a script Victoria had written. "When did this start?" Rebecca asked, her scientific mind seeking data, timelines, evidence. "Does it matter?" Victoria answered for him, moving to stand beside Daniel, her hands sliding possessively around his waist. "It started because you failed as a wife, because you made Daniel feel invisible, because you chose your career over your marriage." Rebecca's laugh erupted involuntarily, bitter and sharp, but it was tinged with genuine disbelief at the audacity of this stranger critiquing a marriage she knew nothing about. "You don't know anything about my marriage," Rebecca said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "And you," she turned to Daniel, "you're really going to do this, throw away 12 years because of her." "I'm doing this because I deserve to be happy," Daniel said, and for the first time his voice carried conviction. "I deserve someone who puts me first, someone who doesn't disappear into a lab for days at a time, someone who remembers she has a husband." "I was working," Rebecca said, her voice breaking. "I was working to secure our future." "By abandoning your present," Victoria interrupted again, clearly relishing her role in this destruction. "Daniel told me how you missed Lily's dance recital, Marcus's championship game, your own anniversary dinner." The accusations hit their marks, but each one was a memory twisted, context stripped away. Rebecca had missed Lily's recital because she was presenting her research to the FDA. She'd missed Marcus's game because she was negotiating with investors who would only meet on that specific day. She'd missed their anniversary because Daniel had scheduled it on the same night as her critical patent hearing without asking her first. "You can't just kick me out," Rebecca said, fighting to maintain composure. "This is my house, too. Legally." "Actually," Daniel pulled a folded document from his pocket, his expression smug. "I can. This house is in my name only. My inheritance from my father bought it. You have no legal claim." The revelation struck like a physical blow, but Rebecca's mind immediately began cataloging facts, searching her memory of the purchase. 9 years ago, she'd been pregnant with Marcus, overwhelmed with morning sickness and research deadlines. Daniel had handled all the paperwork, assured her the house was their shared asset, their family home. "You're lying," Rebecca said, but her voice wavered with uncertainty. "Check the deed," Daniel said, tossing the document at her feet. "It's all there. This house belongs to me, and I want you gone." Rebecca bent to retrieve the paper, her hands shaking as she scanned the legal text. But there it was, in official stamps and signatures. The house was solely in Daniel's name. She'd been so trusting, so focused on her research, that she'd never verified what he'd told her. "Fine," Rebecca said, straightening her spine, drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. "I'll leave, but I'm taking my children." "No," Daniel said simply. "You're not." The world stopped, but in that suspended moment Rebecca saw with crystalline clarity the full extent of Daniel's betrayal, the calculated cruelty of a man who had planned every detail. "What did you say?" Rebecca whispered. "The children stay with me," Daniel repeated. You can see them on weekends, supervised visits. My lawyer has already filed for full custody." "On what grounds?" Rebecca demanded, her voice rising to a shout. "I'm their mother." "On the grounds that you're never home," Victoria said, her smile widening. "On the grounds that you prioritize your work over your children. Daniel has documented every missed event, every late night, every time you chose your lab over your family. Any judge will see you're an unfit mother." The room spun as Rebecca processed the enormity of the trap, but her scientist's mind began assembling counter-evidence, preparing her defense, calculating odds and strategies. "I'm not leaving without Lily and Marcus," Rebecca said, her voice iron. "Then I'll call the police," Daniel said, pulling out his phone, "and have you removed for trespassing." "Trespassing?" Rebecca's voice cracked. "I live here." "Not anymore," Daniel said, his finger hovering over the screen. "You have 30 minutes to pack a bag and leave. If you're still here after that, I'm calling the cops. And I promise you, Rebecca, if you make a scene, if you upset the children, I'll use it in court. I'll show the judge how unstable you are, how you can't control your emotions, how you're a danger to their well-being." The threat was clear, but what paralyzed Rebecca wasn't the legal implications. It was the realization that Daniel had become a stranger, someone capable of weaponizing her love for their children against her. "I need to see them," Rebecca said, tears finally breaking through her composure. "I need to tell them." "No," Daniel cut her off. "They're sleeping. My mother gave them dinner and put them to bed. You'll only confuse them. I'll explain everything tomorrow when you're gone." "Daniel, please," Rebecca begged, abandoning pride, willing to prostrate herself if it meant staying connected to her children. "Don't do this. Whatever I've done wrong, I can fix it. I can work less. I can be more present. Just don't take my children from me." "It's too late," Daniel said, and for just a moment something flickered in his eyes. But it wasn't remorse or compassion. It was satisfaction, the pleasure of a man finally wielding power over someone he'd resented for years. Victoria moved closer to Daniel, her hand sliding into his, but her eyes stayed locked on Rebecca, drinking in every moment of her devastation like fine wine. "The clock's ticking," Victoria said. 28 minutes now. Better get packing." Rebecca wanted to fight, to scream, to tear down the house she'd thought was her home, but some survival instinct whispered that Daniel was serious, that he would call the police, that any display of emotion would be used against her in the custody battle to come. She had to retreat, regroup, prepare her counterattack with the same methodical precision she applied to her research. "I need more than 30 minutes, Rebecca said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I need to gather important documents, my research." "You have 30 minutes, Daniel repeated, "or you leave with nothing." Rebecca climbed the stairs on legs that felt disconnected from her body, but her mind was already racing, cataloging what she needed, what she couldn't leave behind. She passed the children's rooms, pausing at each door, pressing her hand against the wood as if she could transmit her love through the solid barrier. In the master bedroom she'd shared with Daniel for 9 years, Rebecca found her research materials had already been boxed up, but as she opened each container, she realized critical documents were missing, her most sensitive research notes nowhere to be found. Daniel had been planning this for weeks, possibly months, stealing her work while pretending everything was normal. She packed a suitcase with mechanical efficiency, but her hands kept reaching for items that represented her life here. The photo of Lily's first day of school, Marcus's drawings magneted to the refrigerator, the anniversary cards Daniel had written when he still loved her. Each item was a memory, a moment of happiness now poisoned by betrayal. 29 minutes later, Rebecca descended the stairs with a single suitcase and her briefcase. But she'd left behind a dozen boxes of research, her children's artwork, the accumulated treasures of a life she'd thought was permanent. Daniel stood by the door, Victoria draped over him like a possession, But when Rebecca passed, he grabbed her arm, his grip tight enough to bruise. "One more thing," Daniel said, his voice low. "Don't try to contact the children. Don't show up at their school. Don't call the house. Any violation of these rules, and I'll get a restraining order. Understand?" Rebecca jerked her arm free, but she nodded, unable to trust her voice, unable to look at this man without seeing a monster where her husband used to be. "Good," Daniel said, opening the front door. "Have a nice life, Rebecca." The blizzard hit her like a wall of ice, but it was nothing compared to the cold of Daniel's dismissal. Rebecca stepped into the snow, her suitcase wheels immediately bogging down in the accumulation. The driveway stretched before her, her Mercedes barely visible through the whiteout conditions. Behind her, the door slammed shut, but she heard the distinct click of the locks engaging, the sound of her family sealing her out. She turned back once, seeing Daniel and Victoria silhouetted in the window, watching her struggle through the storm like spectators at an execution. Rebecca's tears froze on her cheeks, but she forced herself forward, dragging her suitcase through snow that reached her calves, her expensive heels offering no traction, her coat insufficient for the brutal weather. She'd been kicked out into a blizzard, sent away like garbage, separated from her children who would wake tomorrow wondering where their mother had gone. The Mercedes refused to start at first, but after 3 attempts the engine turned over, the dashboard lights illuminating her tear-stained face. She sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel, body shaking with cold and shock and rage, so profound it felt like a living thing inside her chest. But as she sat there, something shifted. But it wasn't defeat, it was clarity, the same cold precision that had allowed her to solve problems that had stumped researchers for decades. Daniel thought he'd destroyed her, thought he'd taken everything that mattered, thought he'd reduced her to a broken woman with nothing left to lose. He had no idea about the contract in her briefcase, but more importantly, he had no idea what he'd awakened in her. Rebecca Matthews, the woman who had dedicated her life to curing degenerative diseases, who had fought through skepticism and sexism and countless failures, who had built an empire in secret while her husband slept, was not going to disappear into the snow and surrender. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through contacts until she found her attorney's number. But she didn't call him yet. Not until she'd formulated a plan. Not until she'd transformed her rage into strategy. The blizzard continued to rage around her car, but inside, Rebecca's mind had never been clearer. Daniel had made 3 critical mistakes, but he wouldn't realize them until it was far too late to save himself. First, he'd underestimated her, assumed that because she'd been a devoted wife and mother, she would crumble under his cruelty. Second, he'd kicked her out before the contract completed, before he had any legal claim to her fortune. Third, he'd revealed his true nature so completely that any judge would see through his manufactured custody case. Rebecca started recording a voice memo, but her voice was steady now, clinical, detailing everything that had just happened with the precision of someone documenting a scientific experiment. She described Victoria's presence, Daniel's threats, the missing research documents, the calculated timing of his betrayal. This recording would be the foundation of her legal defense. She drove away from the estate slowly, carefully, navigating the treacherous roads, but in her rear-view mirror, she watched the house disappear into the snow, and with it, the last remnants of the woman she'd been. That woman was dead, killed by a husband's betrayal and left in a snowdrift. Someone new was being born, someone Daniel Matthews would come to fear. Rebecca checked into a hotel 30 miles away, but she didn't sleep. Instead, she spread her contract across the desk, studying every clause, every provision, every advantage it gave her. The money would arrive in 72 hours, but she needed to move faster than that. At 3:47 a.m., she finally called her attorney, But she also called 3 private investigators, 2 of the most ruthless divorce lawyers in Connecticut, and a child psychologist who specialized in custody evaluations. By dawn, she'd set in motion a cascade of actions that would dismantle Daniel's life piece by piece. The private investigators delivered their first report within 48 hours, but it was better than Rebecca could have imagined. Victoria Ashford had a history, a pattern of targeting wealthy married men, engineering divorces, and extracting settlements before moving to her next victim. She'd done it twice before, and Daniel was simply her latest mark. More importantly, the investigators discovered that Victoria had been stealing from Daniel's company, but in small enough amounts that he hadn't noticed, siphoning money from accounts he rarely checked. She'd been planning to disappear with a substantial nest egg once Daniel's divorce was finalized, leaving him with nothing but debt and humiliation. Rebecca might have warned him, but the man who had kicked her out into a blizzard didn't deserve her protection. Instead, she cataloged the evidence, building a file that would destroy Victoria's credibility in any courtroom while simultaneously demonstrating Daniel's staggering negligence and poor judgment. The money transferred on schedule, but Rebecca didn't celebrate. She used the first $1 million to retain the best legal team in the state, lawyers who made Daniel's attorney look like a first-year law student. She used another $1 million to secure temporary custody rights, filing an emergency motion that forced Daniel to allow supervised visits with the children. When she finally saw Lily and Marcus again, in a sterile conference room with a court-appointed supervisor watching, but their tears nearly broke her resolve. They didn't understand why Mommy had left, why Daddy's new friend was sleeping in Mommy's bed, why everything had changed so suddenly. "I didn't leave you," Rebecca told them, holding both children close. "I would never leave you. Daddy asked me to go away for a little while, but I'm fighting to come home. Do you understand? Mommy is fighting to be with you." "Why did Daddy's friend say you didn't want us anymore?" Lily asked, her voice small and confused. Rebecca's rage crystallized into diamond-hard certainty, but she kept her voice gentle for her children. "That's not true, baby. That woman lied. I want you more than anything in the world, and I'm going to prove it." The court battle began in earnest, but Rebecca approached it like she approached her research, methodically, thoroughly, leaving nothing to chance. Her lawyers painted a picture of Daniel's cruelty, his calculated betrayal, his willingness to traumatize his children for his own selfish desires. They presented evidence of Rebecca's professional success, but carefully, demonstrating that her work had been providing for the family's future, not neglecting them. They brought in colleagues who testified to her dedication, teachers who confirmed she'd never missed a parent-teacher conference, coaches who remembered her at every game, despite Daniel's false timeline. Daniel's case collapsed within weeks, but Rebecca wasn't satisfied with merely winning custody. She wanted him to understand what he'd destroyed, wanted him to feel the same devastation he'd inflicted on her. Her opportunity came when Victoria's theft was exposed, but it was worse than the initial investigation had revealed. She'd stolen nearly $800,000 from Daniel's investment firm, forged his signature on documents, created false accounts in his name. When the FBI began investigating, Victoria disappeared, leaving Daniel to face fraud charges alone. His company imploded, but Rebecca made sure to buy up the debt, to become his primary creditor, to control his financial future. Within 3 months of kicking her out, Daniel had lost his business, his reputation, and was facing potential prison time. The custody hearing was almost anticlimactic, but the judge's decision was unequivocal. Full custody to Rebecca, supervised visits only for Daniel until he completed therapy and demonstrated stability. The judge's words were scathing, condemning Daniel's reprehensible cruelty and staggering lack of judgment. But Rebecca wasn't done. But her final move required patience, required waiting for exactly the right moment. That moment came 6 months after the divorce was finalized, when Daniel's legal troubles had consumed his savings, when he'd been forced to sell the mansion, when he was living in a modest apartment and working a job that barely covered his expenses. She arranged a meeting, but on her terms, in her office, in the building that housed VitaGen Solutions headquarters, a structure she'd purchased with a fraction of her wealth. Daniel arrived looking haggard, desperate, probably hoping she'd offer some mercy, some relief from the consequences of his actions. "Thank you for coming," Rebecca said, her voice professional, detached. "I wanted you to see what you threw away." She showed him the contract, but more than that, she explained exactly how wealthy she'd become, how the deal he'd known nothing about had transformed her into a billionaire. She described the empire she'd built while he slept, the revolutionary treatment that would save millions of lives, the legacy she'd create. "You kicked me out thinking I was nothing," Rebecca said, watching his face drain of color. "Thinking I was just a failed scientist playing in a lab. You had no idea what I'd become, what I was capable of, and now it's too late." Daniel tried to speak, but Rebecca held up her hand, silencing him. "I'm not here to gloat," she continued. "I'm here to give you a gift, a taste of what you destroyed." She pulled out a document, but it wasn't a check or an offer of reconciliation. It was a report from her research team, describing a new treatment they'd developed for stress-induced neurological conditions. "This is cutting-edge gene therapy," Rebecca explained. "It can reverse certain types of paralysis caused by psychological trauma. We've been testing it for FDA approval." "Why are you telling me this?" Daniel asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Because you're going to need it," Rebecca said simply. She gestured to her security team, but they didn't move toward Daniel. Instead, they simply stood there, witnesses to what would come next. "You see," Rebecca continued, I've spent the last 6 months not just winning in court, but understanding you. Understanding what makes you tick, what you value, what you fear. And I've realized something important. You're a coward, Daniel. You've always been a coward." "Rebecca, please," Daniel started, but she cut him off. "The stress of your legal troubles, the investigation, the loss of everything you thought made you important, it's been eating you alive," Rebecca said, her voice clinical. "Your blood pressure has been dangerously high. You've been having episodes of numbness in your extremities. You've ignored these symptoms because you're too proud to see a doctor, too afraid of what they might find." Daniel's face went pale, but Rebecca could see he recognized the truth in her words. "What you don't know is that I've been monitoring your medical records," Rebecca continued, "legally through proper channels as part of the custody evaluation. And what I found is alarming. You're developing a stress-induced neurological condition. If left untreated, it will progress to complete paralysis within 6 to 8 months. The room seemed to freeze, but Rebecca's expression remained neutral, scientific, as if discussing data from an experiment. "You're lying," Daniel whispered, but his voice trembled with fear. "I'm a scientist," Rebecca replied. "I don't lie about medical data. Here's your file. Read it yourself." She slid a folder across her desk, but Daniel's hand shook so violently he could barely open it. Inside were test results, scans, doctor's notes from a physician who had examined him during the custody proceedings. "This can't be happening," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "There has to be treatment." "There is," Rebecca said softly. "The therapy I just described. We're still in trials, but preliminary results are promising. 93% reversal of paralysis symptoms in early-stage patients." Hope flickered across Daniel's face. but Rebecca's next words extinguished it like water on flame. "But there's a problem," she continued. "The treatment costs approximately $2.3 million per patient, and it's not covered by insurance. It's experimental, you see, only available to those who can afford it." Daniel's face crumpled, but Rebecca felt nothing. No satisfaction, no remorse. Only the cold certainty that justice was being served. "I don't have that kind of money," Daniel whispered. "You know I don't. Rebecca, please, if there's any mercy in you." "Mercy?" Rebecca's voice was ice. "Did you show me mercy when you kicked me out into a blizzard? Did you show our children mercy when you tried to take their mother away? Did you show mercy when you stole my research, when you lied to judges, when you let that woman poison everything we'd built?" "I'm sorry," Daniel sobbed, all pretense of dignity abandoned. "I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was stupid. Please, Rebecca, please don't let me end up paralyzed. I'll do anything." "Anything?" Rebecca asked, leaning forward. "Would you give up your parental rights? Would you sign over any future claims to my wealth? Would you publicly admit what you did? Acknowledge your cruelty, accept full responsibility?" "Yes," Daniel said without hesitation. "Yes, anything. Just help me." Rebecca studied him for a long moment, but she'd already made her decision, had made it months ago when she first conceived this plan. "No," she said simply. The word hung in the air like an execution, but Rebecca continued, her voice never wavering. "You see, Daniel, I am going to help you, not because you deserve it, but because I'm not the monster you tried to make me into. I'm going to provide you with the treatment completely free of charge." Confusion washed over Daniel's face, but Rebecca wasn't finished. "However," she continued, "there are conditions. You will sign over all parental rights to our children. You will never contact them again unless they initiate it as adults. You will publicly acknowledge your fraud, your affair, your cruelty. You will spend the rest of your life knowing that the only reason you can still walk is because the woman you betrayed is a better person than you could ever be." "And if I refuse?" Daniel asked, though they both knew he wouldn't. "Then you'll be paralyzed within 8 months," Rebecca said flatly, "and I'll still have my children, my wealth, my success. But you'll have nothing except a body that won't obey you, trapped in the prison of consequences you built for yourself." It wasn't really a choice, but Rebecca had structured it to feel like one, had engineered this moment with the same precision she applied to molecular biology. Daniel would agree because he was a coward, because he'd always prioritized his own comfort over everything else, because even now, faced with losing his children forever, he'd choose himself. "I'll sign," Daniel whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I'll sign whatever you want." Rebecca slid the documents across her desk, but as Daniel reached for them, his hand suddenly spasmed, fingers curling involuntarily. He gasped, staring at his hand as if it belonged to someone else. "It's starting," Rebecca said quietly. "The preliminary symptoms. You have maybe 3 months before it becomes permanent. Sign now and we begin treatment tomorrow." Daniel signed with his left hand, his right still trembling uncontrollably, but each signature was an admission of defeat, an acknowledgement that Rebecca had won completely and utterly. When he finished, Rebecca took the documents back, but she made no move to provide the promised treatment information. "Rebecca?" Daniel asked, fear creeping back into his voice. "The treatment will begin tomorrow, as promised," Rebecca said, standing. "But Daniel, there's one more thing you should know." She walked to the window, looking out over the city, but when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute victory. "The neurological condition, the paralysis, it's entirely psychological." Daniel's face went white, but Rebecca continued, driving the knife deeper. "There's nothing physically wrong with you. The tremors, the numbness, the test results, all manufactured, all part of the custody evaluation. to demonstrate your psychological instability. The treatment I described? It's just intensive therapy for psychosomatic conditions. You mean? Daniel couldn't finish the sentence. I mean you were never in danger of physical paralysis, Rebecca said, turning to face him. But you are now. The mind is a powerful thing, Daniel. You believed so completely that you were dying, that your body was failing, that by the time you realize it was all psychological, the damage will be real. That's what happens when stress and belief combine. They create their own reality. Daniel tried to stand, but his legs gave out, and he collapsed to the floor. Rebecca's security team moved forward, but she waved them back. You did this, Rebecca said, looking down at him. Every bit of this. You created this situation when you chose cruelty over compassion, when you kicked your wife out into the snow, when you tried to weaponize your children against their mother. What I've done is simply show you the consequences of your actions. Help me, Daniel begged from the floor, his body now fully trembling. Rebecca, please. I am helping you, Rebecca said coldly. You'll receive the therapy you need. Real therapy to address the psychological damage you've done to yourself. Whether you ever walk again depends entirely on whether you can face what you've become, acknowledge what you've done, and find some way to live with it. She nodded to her security team, but they lifted Daniel gently, professionally, carrying him toward the door. One more thing, Rebecca called after him. Your apartment, your car, your few remaining assets. I own them all. You're living on my mercy now, surviving because I choose to allow it. Remember that every morning when you wake up. Remember that the woman you tried to destroy is the only reason you have anything left. The door closed behind him, but Rebecca remained at the window, watching the city lights flicker in the darkness. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a hollow emptiness where her love for Daniel used to live. Her phone buzzed with a message from Lily. Mom, can we have pancakes tomorrow for breakfast? Rebecca smiled for the first time in months, but it was genuine, warm, untainted by the darkness of revenge. Of course, baby, she replied. Chocolate chip pancakes, your favorite. She gathered her things, preparing to leave the office, but paused at a framed photo on her desk. Her father, in his final days, eyes still bright despite his body's failure. He'd spent his last breath telling her to use her gifts to help people, to make the world better, to never let cruelty win. Rebecca had done that, but she'd also learned that sometimes help looked like harsh truth. Sometimes making the world better meant ensuring cruel men faced consequences, and sometimes preventing cruelty from winning required strategic ruthlessness. Daniel would recover or he wouldn't, but either way, he'd spend the rest of his life knowing he'd destroyed his own family for nothing, thrown away a fortune he never knew existed, and transformed the woman who loved him into the architect of his downfall. That knowledge would be its own paralysis, far more permanent than any physical condition. Rebecca left her office, stepping into the December night, but this time, she had a warm car waiting, a beautiful home to return to, and her children safe in their beds. The snow fell softly around her, but it no longer felt threatening. It was just weather, just one more obstacle to navigate, just another challenge she would overcome through patience, intelligence, and strategic planning. Behind her, in the building she owned, in an office that represented her triumph, Daniel Matthews remained. But he was already a memory, already irrelevant, already paralyzed by the consequences of his own cruelty, whether his body eventually reflected it or not. And Rebecca Matthews, the woman who had been kicked out into a blizzard with nothing but a briefcase containing the future, drove home through the snow to make chocolate chip pancakes for her children, unaware that her story would become legend. A cautionary tale about underestimating quiet women who work while cruel men sleep, and a reminder that the worst paralysis isn't physical. It's the moment you realize you've destroyed everything that mattered and there's no going back.